Story time. So one day I'm in the classroom teaching, and there's a student who his advisor said that he struggles with oppositional defiance. I said, okay. She said, you need to be prepared for that. I said, okay. So he always sat in the front of the class, and whenever I would give the class a task or kind of start to unpack some of the curriculum, his hand would go up. And he wasn't asking questions so much as he was questioning me, right? So it wasn't about curiosity, it was about challenge, okay? And so, for example, I would say, okay, I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes. I have put a prompt on the board. I want you guys to write in response to the prompt. Well, what if I can't think of anything? I said, okay, well, the 5 minutes are there. So you have time to mull it over. And even if you can only come up with one word, you can stick with that one word and we can build off of it when the time is up. So it was that type of dynamic, right? And it got to the point where, because he always sat in the front, whenever he would raise his hand, he did not see that the classmates that were sitting behind him, they would start rolling their eyes. They would start looking at each other like, here we go with this. And I said, okay, this is a situation that I need to manage because, this is the classroom dynamic. It needs to be a constructive place for everybody to learn. So one day I said, I need to speak with you after class. And so after class, I said, I appreciate your participation and you have a lot of questions. And sometimes I'm not going to be able to answer all of those questions in class. So if you have a question and I don't get to your hand or I don't acknowledge your hand, I'm not ignoring you, but we have a set amount of time. We got a certain amount of material we have to get through. I have an obligation to your classmates. I have an obligation to the class, the discipline, to be able to get through that material. But if you have any additional questions that I do not answer during our allotted class time, I'm more than happy to stick around afterwards and answer any questions you may have. And he looked at me and said, so basically you're telling me to shut the fuck up. I said, no. We have a certain amount of time. We have a certain amount of material. And if you have any additional questions, I'm more than happy to help you after class. And I will be sending a follow-up in writing because this is academia. The pen is mightier than the sword. Okay. And I use that as an example of how sometimes there is a distortion between what is said and what is heard. Okay. That there is an interruption, a disruption between the sender and the receiver. And sometimes that disruption is trauma. Sometimes that disruption is some unhealed wound, some unresolved issue. Sometimes sometimes the disruptor is a lived experience or a trigger, and what you're hearing triggers or reminds you of something really terrible that has happened to you. And so in today's video, we are going to talk about what happens in that distortion. What happens when there is an interruption between what is said versus what is heard, how that limits us, how that constricts us, and what are some possibilities for us to be able to have public, constructive discourse without processing it or hearing it through the lens of our hurt. Keep watching. So in my last video, I think it was my last video, one of my recent videos, I talked about the destruction and the corrosive nature of these social media gender wars, right? And how there are moments in our discourse where when there are men who try to hold other men accountable for their behavior or the way they're showing up online, they will get attacked. He gets called a simp. He gets called a sucker. She's not going to sleep with you. Like, just bat it down. On the flip side of that, whenever women, and this has happened to me, whenever women try to say, can we have a healthier discourse? Can we talk about ways to move forward or move towards some sort of healthy coexistence? Then it's like, you're a pick-me, you're an apologist, you are male-centered. So where does that leave us? Because that really is the bigger concern. One of the things I try not to do is get into the weeds. Is really try not to get into the very granular aspects of an issue, because what is that saying? Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. So I always think that it's important for us to think bigger picture, okay, for us to kind of like zoom out and just kind of see what is happening collectively, okay, what is happening to all of us. And when we talk about issues of race, when we talk about issues of class and economic disparity, when we talk about issues of gender and how women are disproportionately abused. Okay, so I have written extensively on my Substack, shameless plug. I have written extensively on my Substack about how 90% of the violence that happens in this country and others is committed by men, and start drilling down into the societal aspects of why that happens, right? So when we talk about all of these issues, and it's a public discourse, because this isn't Game of Thrones, this isn't an episode of Scandal. It's not like some scripted narrative where, the parts have been played, the roles have been cast, the checks have been cut, and now we're just sitting here kind of consuming the content. It's not like that. When you show up as in the creator space, there's these kind of parasocial dynamics where it's like you're accessible. I can touch you. I can talk to you. I can attack you. I can troll you. That sort of thing, right? So when we show up to these public spaces and there's these hot button issues, but we are showing up and processing the content exclusively through our lived experience, or exclusively through our hurt and trauma, or exclusively from our perspective, I think that limits the conversations that we can have. And so once it resorts to or devolves to the name calling, the once we start going into simp culture, or you're a pick me, like once you start naming, blaming, and shaming, where does that leave us societally? Where does that leave us? And then if you do want to get to a granular level, then you have to ask yourself, in what way am I participating in this? Am I participating in a defensive posture where I see so much about myself that is so negative and so toxic that I feel like I have to like come out swinging, like I'm like Joe Frazier, like, wait a minute, okay, flag on the play. Are you coming at it from an offensive posture? Like, let me just pull out the word machete and just cut these mofos up and, let them know who's boss. Are you coming at it from through the lens of victimization? Like, look, I have been abused, traumatized, hurt, like you have no idea what that is and what that feels like. And so I'm here speaking on behalf of the victims. And fun fact about me. So I actually grew up in one such household. My childhood, a good chunk of it was characterized by violence and abuse. I have seen domestic partner violence up close and personal. I have lived that life. I have seen my mother and heard my mother cry for help and scream bloody murder and be a helpless kid with no resources, no support system, and just kind of forced to be in that situation. And so I very easily could show up to a lot of these public discourses locked and loaded and ready to fire. At the same time, what I have done with the experience of my trauma is process it and heal it in a way that I can extract learning from it, that I can extract lessons from it, that I can research and study and try to give an informed perspective that's bigger than my lived experience. That's just how I have chosen to process my trauma. And I got complex PTSD. So for whatever that's worth, I have been in these trenches, and I worry and I am concerned that so many of us are showing up to these public discourses so hurt, so wounded, so defensive, so ready to fight or having to defend that we cannot even talk to one another, that we cannot bridge the growing divide in these yet to be United States. And when I zoom out, so I have been trained through a sociological lens, right? So I'm looking at sociologists essentially study groups of people in their natural habitat. It's kind of like this very anthropological type of study. So, and you're always studying. Like once you get trained to see certain things a certain way, like you literally cannot turn it off, right? So on the one hand, there's people like me who have experienced abuse, who have witnessed abuse, who have been traumatized and still have to deal with the lingering effects of said trauma, right? And then there are moms who have sons who are like, what am I going to do? Because I'm trying to raise a certain type of kid. And even though I have my values and things that I believe in and virtues that I try to espouse in this household, I'm not raising my child in a vacuum. My son has his peer groups. So the boys club, and then he has school, and then he has access to TikTok or these algorithms that immediately indoctrinate young men with rhetoric. Okay. Like they come hot and heavy. Like literally, they have done these studies where people created TikTok accounts as young teenagers, right? Like they pretended that they were young teenage boys. And they said within 15 minutes, boom, they were getting hit with the rhetoric, right? They were getting hit with the indoctrination. And so I think about that mom and I'm like, what are her options? What are the kinds of conversations that we can have to help her move forward, to help her either save or shape or kind of like direct her son towards a healthier path of manhood, of healthier masculinity? And then I think about there are women, heterosexual women, who still very much want to be in romantic partnership and build families with men. And they're seeing all of this and witnessing all of these other dynamics too. And so what kind of conversation can she have? What are the options that are available for her? And so you have all of these experiences that are coexisting. And we have all of these approaches to public discourse with varying interests, varying agendas. Some of them are protective, some of them are destructive, some of them are aspirational. And what do we do with all of it? Is there room for all of it to coexist in a healthy way? Is there a way where we can diminish and rightfully sanction the destructive, abusive, misogynistic, corrosive, racist, and all of the other behaviors and say we wholeheartedly condemn this and this is not how we treat one another? Are there conversations that men need to be having with other men and talk in terms of the next generation of young men who are coming through the pipeline, right? That are kind of coming down the pipeline and saying, what are they being exposed to and what is their mindset? And because a lot of young men feel like they are the instant villain without saying a word, without doing anything, that just the perception of his maleness is so toxic and corrosive that his existence is a problem. What kinds of conversations do we have there? And then for people who want to be romantically partnered and coupled and what have you, what kinds of conversations do we start to have where we can cultivate some sort of healthy coexistence and not hear, process, comment strictly from the viewpoint the negative aspects of our experience. Because here's the thing, and please hear me. Healing does not mean that your pain does not matter. Healing means that it's not the only thing that matters. Healing does not mean that your pain is not valid. Healing means it's not the only thing that's valid. And so for me, I could have gone the rest of my days being right about being wronged, because I was. Okay. Y'all don't know my story, but I could tell you some things. I really could. Okay. I don't look like what I've been through. And I could have kind of like chosen the route of grievance. I could have chosen the route of defensiveness. But the thing about me, and this is just me personally, okay? Maybe it's the Aries in me. I don't know. But my mindset has always been, if you get me in the wash, you're not going to get me in the rinse, okay? If you got me on the front end, you're not going to get me in the back end. Whatever happened does not get to dictate the terms for the rest of my life, because I feel like that's just too much power. I feel like that's too much juice. I feel like that's too much of a hold, okay? Now, it doesn't mean don't be wise. It doesn't mean be naive. It doesn't mean be reckless. It doesn't mean don't learn. We absolutely learn. But whatever I have experienced in hurtful ways, I have chosen a path of liberation for that pain. And my hope in showing up here and doing these YouTube videos is always to just show people that liberation is an option, because the opposite looks very much like survival mode, where you are just hyper vigilant and always looking over your shoulder and waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that is a challenging existence. And I just want more for all of us. Does that make sense? So here are some questions that I think can help move us forward, or at least get us to consider and have some self-awareness about how we're showing up in these conversations, in these discourses. First question. Got my trusty Post-its. First question. Is this person presenting in bad faith? And it's usually pretty easy to parse that out. Okay, when somebody has a hidden agenda, your spidey senses kind of start to tingle. Even if they sound like intellectual, it has a strong bias, and you're like, okay, you're not engaging in bad faith. I mean, you're not engaging in good faith. So when you think about intent, I think that's a worthy consideration. Like, is this person presenting in bad faith, or are they trying to elevate discourse, move in a productive direction? I've heard these criticisms about, what is his name? Scott Galloway. So Scott Galloway has a large following, and some people really like him and some people really don't. And there are some people that are like, we have to allow room for people like Scott to be imperfect. Okay, he may not have all the right words, but his heart is in the right place. So for whatever that's worth, and I don't have a dog in the fight where Professor Galloway is concerned one way or the other, because I'm not familiar enough with his material. But these are critiques and takes that I've heard in passing. So I think assessing intent is one thing to consider. Number two, when you hear things, are you hearing with your emotional ear, or are you hearing with your logical ear? And that matters, right? So what is the lens by which you are processing this information? Now, y'all, when you become a woman of a certain age, anything that is within like 2 feet, I cannot without these glasses. Okay. I am very much that. What does that say? That's just how it is. Like that is where I am these days. But yeah, it's kind of like this, all right. And so when I'm reading things without my glasses, I'm like, am I too close to this to see it clearly? Okay. Am I too close to this to be able to see it clearly? And do I need to be able to process this through another lens? And so when you're listening to this content or watching this content, or you have opportunities to engage in public discourse, I think it's worth asking yourself, what ear are you hearing with? Is this your emotional ear, the ear of wounding, the ear of past hurt and unhealed wounds? Or is this a logical ear? Am I hearing with, my intellectual parts of my brain? Is this frontal lobe action, or are we dealing with the amygdala? Like what part of the brain is working here? Number 3, do you need to hear this more than once? So a lot of times what happens when we consume content is we react instead of respond. Sometimes we need to hear it more than once. Sometimes we need to mull it over. Sometimes we need to give it another listen and be like, did I hear what I think I heard, or did I hear something different? And I think that that's worth slowing down to assess. So sometimes we hear and we aim, fire, shoot, or however the saying goes. And sometimes it's worth taking the time to hear it again and confirm our initial assessment or evaluation of what we just heard or what we just watched. And then last but not least, do I need to wade in these waters? Like, do I need to get involved? So you guys know that GIF where this little baby walks in and he's like, oh, 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 and then he turns around and walks out. That's like in my top 5. I love that little baby. I would love to know what he's doing now. Like, he's probably all grown up. But sometimes I see something and I'm ready to like respond or like give my 2 cents. And I'm like, nope, 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 not, nope. I don't need to. I don't have anything to add. I don't have another log to put into the fire. I just am opting out. And that's always a choice, right? Like, you can always opt out of the discourse. Sometimes you opt out of the discourse because the environment is so contentious that nothing you say will be heard. Okay, that whatever you try to say will just fall on deaf ears if you're trying to cut through the noise. Sometimes it's already been said and you couldn't have said it any better, and at least that perspective has been represented. But sometimes it's okay to just kind of step back and just let other people do their thing. And so as you are consuming content and listening to content, assess intent. What ear are you listening with? Do you need to hear it more than once to see if you are reacting or responding? And then do you need to respond at all? And then, because I'm a whole nerd, of course, I'm going to leave you with some recommendations, some reading recommendations if you just want to take a step back and process who you are and who you're becoming in the quagmire of this divided nation, in the quagmire of this divisive content. It's just a lot. And sometimes we don't even realize the way that we're being impacted and affected. And so I want to offer these resources in hopes that they will be of some use to you. One of them is, hold up, do I have this book in I don't. See, I rearranged this whole bookshelf situation, and now all of my books that used to be like right here are now over there. But the book is called What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry. And that book really does a great job of explaining what happens to your brain when you have experienced trauma and how that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, how that kicks in, and how trauma influences the way that you think, the way that you trust, the way that you don't, the way that you engage, the way that you don't, the way that you perceive things, okay? Like, trauma can very much be a distortion in the way that you interact in society. And so that book does a really good job of explaining that. And one of the most surprising things about that book is that the best balm for trauma, believe it or not, is not therapy. The best balm for trauma, according to the research, is consistently healthy interactions in a safe community. And I think that's the point of kind of like what I do here. I'm like, how do we get to the safe community? Can we be in safety with one another? Some people are just not going to be safe, and that's just what it is, by their own choosing. It's like, you could choose another path, but this is, you've chosen to deviate from the acceptable norms and rules of engagement for being in a healthy community. So there are people who are just not going to. But overall, a lot of what my content is trying to get to is trying to get us to a healthier space. Second book is The Deepest Well by Nadine Harris Burke, or it's either Nadine Burke Harris. I always get it mixed up. Sorry, Dr. Nadine. And her book is about childhood trauma as well, but about how it manifests physically. And so a lot of times, a lot of the autoimmune diseases that we contend with in adulthood are rooted in things that happened in childhood, and talks about ways that we resolve that tension between those two things. So that's going to do it for me. I invite your healthy comments. I invite your quiet contemplation. And as always, you are welcome to subscribe if you find value in this content. I enjoy sharing it with you for the most part. 90% of the time, I do enjoy sharing it with you. Teaching and education is really at the heart of who I am and what I do. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, it feels like I'm screaming into the void. I have had days where I'm like, what is the point? What is the point? Like, this is not even a ripple in the pond. Nobody's listening. Nobody cares. Like, it's not going to change. Like, it is. Trust me. There is a lot to make somebody stop showing up and offering themselves up for public consumption, because you can get eviscerated in a place like this. But I always also see people that say, I needed this. Thank you. This helped me process. This helped me think further. Or this is a refreshing take. And so those little nudges are appreciated, because this is not easy work. But I do appreciate your engagement in it. And I will see you guys next time.